The U.S. Senate about to gavel in to start the day. More debate is expected on the cybersecurity bill. A vote to move the legislation forward is scheduled for 11 a.m. Eastern. The Senate will also consider a bill that extends certain trade pacts and also extends sanctions against Myanmar, a country also known as Burma. And now live Senate coverage here on C-SPAN 2.
The Senate will come to order. The chaplain, Dr. Barry Black, will lead the Senate in prayer.
Let us pray. Lord, you have given us a world full of rich resources. Make us responsible stewards of your generous gifts. Help us to remember that to whom much is given, much is expected. May our accountability to you guide the choices our lawmakers make as they seek to serve you and country today. Lord, fill their minds with wisdom and their hearts with hope, so that they will believe that all things are possible with you. Open their minds to the inflow of your Spirit to prepare them for the decisions they must make this day. We pray in your great name. Amen.
Please join me in the Pledge of Allegiance to our flag. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. The clerk will read a communication to the Senate.
Washington, D.C., August 2nd, 2012. To the Senate, under the provisions of Rule 1, Paragraph 3 of the Standing Rules of the Senate, I hereby appoint the Honorable Tom Udall, a senator from the state of New Mexico, to perform the duties of the chair. Signed, Daniel K. Inouye, President pro tempore.
Mr. President.
Majority Leader.
I now move to proceed to calendar number 476, which is S3457, which is the Veterans Job Corps Act.
The clerk will report.
Motion to proceed to calendar number 476, S3457, a bill to require the Secretary of Veterans Affairs to establish a Veterans Job Corps and for other purposes.
Mr. President.
Majority Leader.
The next half hour will be for debate on the Coburn Amendment to the AGOA Burma Sanctions Bill. Following that debate, the time until 11 a.m. will be equally divided and controlled between two leaders or their designees. At 11 a.m. there will be two votes. First vote will be a cloture vote on the cybersecurity bill, followed by a vote in relation to the Coburn Amendment to AGOA Burma sanctions. The filing deadline for secondary amendments on the cybersecurity bill is 10 a.m. today. Additional votes are possible today, and we'll notify senators when and if they're scheduled. Mr. President, we are going to vote at 11 o'clock, and so those people debating the cloture petition may not get the full hour. So they should understand that. I ask consent the following staff of the Finance Committee be allowed on the Senate floor for the duration of today's session: Dan West, Micah Scudder, and Heather Sykes.
Without objection.
Coburn has a modification. I'm not sure if we're clear yet. I don't know that he's going to ask, but we've got to make sure that we're okay with the modification.
Mr. President,
The Republican leader is recognized.
I'd like to start this morning with a word about cybersecurity. No one doubts the need to strengthen our nation's cybersecurity defenses. Open source reporting clearly shows that our defense industrial base, financial sector, and government networks are all under attack by nation states as well as independent hackers. The U.S. Cyber Command, the NSA, and the FBI are working hard to counter these threats. So we all recognize the problem. That's really not the issue here. The issue is the manner in which the Democratic leadership has tried to steamroll a bill that would address it. Members on both sides of the aisle have recommendations for improving our cyber defenses, and some of them thought this bill would provide an opportunity to propose those ideas through amendments, especially since Democrats didn't allow for an opportunity to do so in committee. Yet, despite preventing members from amending the bill in committee, the anticipated open amendment process, once this new bill got to the Senate floor, never happened. Just never happened, despite being on the bill now for the third day. No senator from either party has been allowed a vote on any amendment. Look, this is a big, complicated, far-reaching bill that involves several committees of jurisdiction. Democratic leaders haven't allowed any of those committees to improve the bill or even vote on it. Frankly, I was a little surprised the majority leader decided to file cloture and end debate before it even started. An issue of this importance deserves serious consideration and open debate. Instead, the majority leader waited until the last week before August to even take it up. Rather than give this issue the time and attention it deserves, Democratic leaders brought it up with only 3 days left before recess and then tried to jam something through without any chance for amendment. The few days the bill was on the floor, the majority limited its consideration to debate only, and then filled the tree and filed cloture. But of course, that's kind of par for the course around here. This is the 65th time the majority leader has filled the amendment tree and filed cloture. The 65th time. Just to give you a point of comparison, the last 6 party leaders did it 40 times combined. The last 6 party leaders did it 40 times combined. So the majority leader has set a historic pace for blocking amendments. No amendments in committee, no amendments on the floor, take it or leave it. That's the story of the Senate under the current leadership. And the notion that we should just roll over and wade through these bills without having a chance to improve them, and that Democratic senators would be willing to be rolled in such a way, is ridiculous, especially on a bill of this significance. I would remind my Democratic friends, none of you were able to offer or have a vote on your amendments. By filing cloture and filling the tree, your amendments were blocked as well. The senior senator from Missouri authored 3 amendments and co-sponsored 3 others. None of those will get votes if cloture is invoked. The senior senator from Arkansas has 2 amendments and co-sponsored another. None of those will get votes if cloture is invoked. The senior senator from Louisiana has authored 2 amendments and co-sponsored 1 more. None of those will get votes if cloture is invoked. As of this morning, 29 Democratic senators have filed 74 amendments, not counting the ones used to fill the tree. That's a lot of amendments. They won't get any votes. Now, I may not support all of these amendments. In fact, I'm sure there are many I probably oppose. But that doesn't mean the senators who propose them should not be entitled to have a chance to make their case. Instead of just rubber stamps for the majority leader, I would encourage these senators to stand up for themselves and their constituents and demand to be heard. After all, the majority leader himself said earlier this year that given the complex nature of this subject, it was essential to have a thorough and open amendment process, and even committed to ensuring it. Let me just read you what the majority leader committed to on this bill in February. of this year. Quote, given the complexity and significance of the legislation, the Majority Leader said, it is essential that we have a thorough and open debate on the Senate floor, including consideration of amendments to perfect the legislation, insert additional provisions where the majority of the Senate supports them, and remove provisions if such support does not exist. For that reason, I have committed to my colleagues that we will have an amendment process that will be fair and reasonable. This legislation will have been subject to as fair, thorough, and open process as is conceivable. That was the Majority Leader in February of this year. So, Mr. President, there's widespread agreement that a cybersecurity bill should eventually pass. We need to improve information sharing between the private and public sectors. And there's a clear indication that we'll need to responsibly debate this matter in the very near future. If cloture isn't invoked today, I'd suggest we work in a bipartisan fashion to complete the bill. And I would suggest that the next time we take it up, we allow the Senate to be the Senate. Let senators have their proposals considered on the floor, especially if the Democratic leadership is not going to allow them to be considered in committee. And, Mr. President, on another matter, Senator, you have a question. I yield to the senator from Arizona for a question.
Just my question is, and I see the Majority Leader wants to speak, but isn't it true that there has been a series of meetings, including the sponsors of the bill, those of us who felt significant modifications need to be made, large numbers of senators have at least tentatively come to some agreement that we think could move this legislation forward in a fashion that recognizes the importance of the issue and yet dramatically, in our view, improves the legislation. So I would hope that the Republican leader and the Majority Leader would not interpret this vote, which clearly cloture will not be invoked, as an impediment to the process that I think was moving on a path where we could have reached some agreement and addressed this issue and this legislation conclusively.
Yeah, I would just say to my friend from Arizona, he's entirely correct. A vote not to finish the bill today is a vote to actually have amendments and an opportunity to modify the bill, as we all know is necessary, including my friend the Majority Leader, who indicated as much back in February. Now, I know the Majority Leader's on his feet and wants to discuss the matter further, and I know he may have time commitments, but I do as well. But I have two other issues here I want to address, and then I'll be happy to yield the floor. 2 years ago tomorrow, Treasury Secretary Tim Geithner declared in a now famous New York Times op-ed entitled, "Welcome to the Recovery," that because of actions taken by the Obama administration during its first year and a half, the U.S. economy was, as he put it, on the road to recovery. Well, I think it's pretty obvious that the Treasury Secretary jumped the gun on that one. Far from putting us on a path to recovery, it's now obvious that President Obama's policies have made a bad situation worse. Secretary Geithner was right to say that the President's policies were having an effect on the economy. He was clearly wrong to conclude that there were anything approaching a lasting positive effect on the economy. On the contrary, we can see that the policies of the President's first 2 years in office put us decidedly on the wrong path. 2 years after Secretary Geithner's op-ed, 23 million Americans are either unemployed, underemployed, or have given up looking for work altogether. Half of college graduates can't find a decent job, and with little or no income, many have decided to move back home with mom and dad. 2 years after Secretary Geithner all but declared victory, GDP growth is still at an anemic 1.5%. Foreclosures are still quite common. More Americans than ever are on food stamps. And 2 years after Secretary Geithner welcomed Americans to the recovery, More Americans are signing up for disability than finding jobs. More Americans are signing up for disability than are finding jobs. All of this after the President and a Democrat-led Congress passed his major policy initiatives. Now, in the face of all these things, you would think the administration would change course, go in a different direction. After all, if it claimed credit then for what it thought was a recovery, it would have to claim credit for what we actually see now. Not exactly, apparently. As it turns out, the administration is happy to claim credit when it thinks things are going well, but even happier to cast blame when it thinks things aren't going well. So 2 years after touting the impact the President's policies were having on our economy, the administration now acts as though they've been irrelevant. They act like an additional $5 trillion in debt isn't affecting people's anxiety about the nation's future. They act like a $1 trillion health care bill that hammers the private sector isn't affecting business activity. They act like the President's perpetual threats to raise taxes aren't impacting investment. They act like somehow the President's attack on free enterprise aren't putting a chill on risk-taking. They act like a barrage of new regulations isn't keeping businesses from hiring and expanding. It's Bush's fault. It's Bush's fault, they say. It's headwinds from Europe. It's the tsunami. It's the Republicans. Well, the President can't have it both ways. He can't be responsible for the economy when he thinks it's going well, then disavow responsibility when it clearly isn't. He's either responsible for it or he isn't. The Treasury Secretary had it right 2 years ago. The President's policies have had a big impact on the economy. What he got wrong was the fact that the impact was actually negative. If we were to ask ourselves whether Americans are better off now than they were 2 years ago, the answer would be obvious. The President's policies have clearly made it harder for Americans to find jobs and to keep those jobs. If the President wants to cast blame for the economic mess we're in, he should look no further than his own policies. And if he's more concerned about the future of the country than his own reelection, he'd work with us to go in a different direction. For 3.5 years, Republicans have stood ready to work with him on the kinds of policies that will empower the private sector to lift us out of this recovery once and for all. Comprehensive tax reform and all of the above energy policy, eliminating burdensome regulations. These are the kinds of things we could do together. We're ready whenever he is. And finally, Mr. President, on one other subject, I apologize to my friends for the Majority Leader for delaying him further. Finally, Mr. President, I want to congratulate my old friend Carl Kalin of Litchfield, Kentucky. Carl was recently appointed National Inspector General of the Veterans of Foreign Wars of the United States at the National Convention in Nevada. Carl is the first Kentuckian to become VFW's National Inspector General, one of the highest positions in that organization. Carl has a long history of serving his country, the Commonwealth of Kentucky, his community, and veterans across the state and indeed the nation. He served in the U.S. Army as a crew chief on an OV-1 Mohawk aircraft in Vietnam in 1968 and 1969. Upon his return in 1969, he joined VFW Post 1170 in Middletown, Kentucky, becoming a VFW Life member. Carl has served the VFW in a number of positions over the years, including as post and district commander, and at the age of 33, as Kentucky's youngest state commander. In those capacities and on the VFW National Council of Administration, Carl worked tirelessly on behalf of America's heroes, our nation's veterans. In addition to his selfless work with the VFW, Carl has also been active with Kentucky's Joint Executive Council of Veterans Organizations and served as mayor and city councilman of the city of Linview, Kentucky. Over the years, I've had the great fortune of working with Carl on a number of issues to ensure our nation's veterans receive the care and the benefits that they deserve. So, Mr. President, I want to congratulate Carl Kalin and his wife, Linda, on his new position and thank him for his military service and tireless dedication to our nation's veterans. I also want to thank him for his friendship over the years. I yield the floor.
Mr. President,
Majority Leader.
I wasn't planning on making a statement today. I thought we should have left the time to the people who are debating these votes we're going to have at 11 o'clock. It's my understanding under the rule that Senator Coburn and others will have a half hour to debate AGOA Burma sanctions for a half hour. Is that right? And whatever time is left over it'll be whatever time's left over for the debate on the motion to proceed to, I'm sorry, not the motion to proceed, but the closure vote. Is that right?
That is correct.
Well, Mr. President, my friend's statement, we'll talk about cybersecurity in a minute, but let's just talk about his continual harangue against the President of the United States. Underscore all this, Mr. President, with what my friend, the Republican leader, has said at the beginning of this Congress, that the number one issue for him in this Congress is defeating President Obama, and that is how the Republicans have acted. To talk about Republican tax plan would have to bring a smile to one's face. Yesterday, an organization called the Tax Policy Center. Now remember, Mr. President, last year Mitt Romney called the Tax Policy Center, quote, an objective third party, and cited one of their studies to bash Rick Perry in the Republican primary. So this objective third party yesterday said this about Romney's tax plan that my friend the Republican leader wants the American people to grab. Well, the only people to be grabbing that are really rich people. The vast majority of Mitt Romney's tax plan would go to people just like him, people making millions of dollars every year. Under Romney's plan, folks making more than $3 million a year would get a tax break of $250,000 per year. So how will he pay for this massive new handout to the top 1%? He'll hand you, 95% of the American people, the bill. Under his plan, that my friend the Republican leader wants, I hope everyone listens to this within the sound of my voice. Because a Republican plan would require the average middle-class family with children to pay $2,000 more in taxes to take care of the millionaires. 95% of families in this country would be asked to pay more so that people like Mitt Romney can get a tax break. Now that's a great program, a wonderful program. Last year, I repeat, Mitt Romney called this Tax Policy Center an objective third party when he was once again changing his position during the Republican debates leading up to his nomination. Now that the group has exposed his plan to hike taxes for 95% of American families while handing out more giveaways to millionaires, the Tax Policy Center is suddenly too liberal, his spokespeople say, to be trusted. But I would suggest, when we're talking about trust, we need to look no further than the person that Mitt Romney wants to, that my friend, the Republican leader, wants to be President of the United States. He's refused to release his tax returns, as we know. If a person coming before this body wanted to be a cabinet officer, he couldn't be if he had he did the same refusal Mitt Romney does about tax returns. So the word's out that he hasn't paid any taxes for 10 years. Let him prove that he has paid taxes, because he hasn't. We already know from one partial tax return that he gave us, he has money hidden in Bermuda, the Cayman Islands, and a Swiss bank account. Not making that up, that's in the partial year that he gave us. Mitt Romney makes more money in a single day than the average middle-class family makes in 2 years or more. So let's not talk about this great plan the Republicans have to create jobs. The number one goal in this body by the Republicans has been to damage the President of the United States. They've refused to work with us in creating jobs. Let's talk a little bit about cybersecurity. Mr. President, we have people coming over here saying, boy, we almost have a deal. I've been hearing that for 3 years. We've been working on cybersecurity for 3 years. They're over here today talking about why don't we have some more meetings. This is a bill that has meetings, meetings, meetings. Chairman Lieberman, Chairman Rockefeller, Chairman Feinstein, we've had meetings, meetings, meetings. Meetings with Republicans, meetings with independents, meetings with business groups. So don't come and lecture us over here about how my senators should vote. We know how important this legislation is. We know. We believe this legislation is more important than getting a pat on the back from the Chamber of Commerce. The Chamber of Commerce does not support this legislation. And that's why the Republicans are running like scared cats, because the Republicans won't endorse doing something that's good for our country. That is protecting us against attacks, cyber attacks. Mr. President, the statements made by the Republican leader speaks volumes. Volumes. This is another filibuster that could have been prevented by their working to get a list of relevant amendments. To show how serious the Republican leader is about cybersecurity, let's just take a few days of this week. We've been stalled and stalled and stalled in months past trying to get a bill. We could never get the Republican leader to endorse a bill. We worked with the White House. They came aboard. We begged, pleaded, let's do a bill together. No, no, because the Chamber of Commerce doesn't want a bill. The first thing we hear about cybersecurity, to show how serious they are, is they've decided, as one of their amendments, they want to repeal Obamacare. They did that on the last day of the month of July, when on the first day of August, all these great benefits for women kick in. Here, where we were standing a few minutes ago, the Republican leader said, I want to vote on Obamacare. And he walks out here a few hours later at the famous Ohio clock and says, cybersecurity, we should do it. It'll take a lot longer to do than what we can do, what time we have. If cloture is not invoked today, it's for the reasons I've just enumerated, but principally because of the Chamber of Commerce. They're opposed to the initial bill because it was mandatory that these companies do something to protect America from these attacks from bad people. So Lieberman and Collins, the two managers of this bill from the Homeland Security Committee, said, okay, we don't think this is the right thing to do, but we won't make the provisions mandatory anymore. That's still not good enough for the Chamber of Commerce. A voluntary alternative is still something opposed by the Chamber of Commerce. The bill is, I have spoken, numerous other people have come to this floor and told how important this bill is. The bill that's before this body now, that we're going to vote cloture on, would be a wonderful step forward. No, it doesn't do everything everyone wants, but it's a good bill. It's to protect our country. The leaders of our security of this nation, General Petraeus, General Dempsey, people working in the NSA, what they say This is more important than Iran. It's more important than Afghanistan, Pakistan, North Korea, whatever, this bill. But the Chamber of Commerce has now interjected themselves in the security of this nation. They think they know more than Petraeus, Dempsey, and all the leaders of this country. And they're telling the Republicans, vote against this. We'll get something better later on. Well, maybe they will. But right now, here's what we have. And I think it sends a very, very bad message to the country that Republicans are not willing to support this legislation. To show how serious the Republicans are to get this bill done, they filed a bill on right-to-work law. They filed an amendment, I said a bill, an amendment on repealing Dodd-Frank. That's just some of the beginning volleys they've shot over here. And my friend, the senior senator from Arizona, steps in here and said, you know, we're working on a list. So, Mr. President, I am disappointed, perplexed, and somewhat confused about how the Republicans want to proceed. It's obvious until they get a sign-off from the Chamber of Commerce that nothing will happen on one of the most important security interests this country has faced in generations. So I would suggest that the Republican leader, rather than out here trying to denigrate this legislation that has been done with the best interests in heart, including one of his most valued senators, Senator Collins, do a conference call with the Chamber of Commerce. Have them come down here and tell them what they want. And maybe what the Chamber of Commerce wants, maybe we can work something out, because they're ruling the place here now as far as this legislation goes. The Chamber of Commerce, I repeat, for the first time that I'm aware in the history of this country, has now become the protector of our nation, security interests. That says it all, Mr. President.
Under the previous order, the leadership time is reserved. Under the previous order, the Senate will proceed to the consideration of S. 3326, which the clerk will report.
Calendar number 459, S3326, a bill to amend the African Growth and Opportunity Act and so forth, and for other purposes.
Mr. President, the senator from Oklahoma is recognized.
I first of all want to say I appreciate the leadership for working to ensure a vote on this package. This package was slowed down not because anybody is truly opposed to what we're trying to do, but the package was slowed down because of the way we're paying for it. And we're going to see that coming over from the House as well. It's not a Republican or Democrat problem. It's a problem of all of us, because there's going to be an emergency farm bill, disaster bill come over that's going to spend almost $400 million, and it's paid for over 5 years. That's got to stop. It's got to stop. Right now, in this country, every man, woman, and child is on the hook for $53,000 of debt. So if you're the typical American family, you're on the hook for $212,000 right now, what we've done. So my objection was not with the AGOA package, it's not with Miramar, it's not with the CAFTA, it's not with any of it. Those are great policy things. My objection is we are addicted to not fulfilling our responsibilities and delaying. So this is a very simple, straightforward message and amendment that does two things. One is that it recognizes a recommendation of the Obama administration in terms of the duplication of things and the need for consolidation. That's how we're eventually going to get out of the hole. We've got $130 trillion in unfunded liabilities, and we have $16 trillion in debt. It was a good recommendation. We totally ignored it. We've ignored it. Nothing's happened on what they've recommended. No, there's been no hearings on what the Obama administration recommended in terms of combining some departments at OMB. So this is just a step towards trying to meet in the middle what the Obama administration has recommended and us actually paying the $200 million in costs over 2 years with $200 million worth of savings in 2 years. The bill as it presently set up takes 10 years to pay for $200 million. Now, you know, we have a $3.7 trillion budget, or CR, and we can't find it's less than 1/100th of 1%, and we can't find it. So what this does is delay the cost, the payment for this bill, over a period of years all the way out to 2023. No family gets to operate that way that's broke, and we are. Nobody that's maxed out their credit cards gets to do that, and we've maxed them out. And so what we're just saying is there's a ton of money that's available that we can use. And we've had 3 amendments on this floor that everybody that's going to be in opposition to this have voted for to eliminate duplication. The vast majority of my colleagues on the other side have voted for it. The vast majority of my colleagues on my side have voted for it. And so we're going to use that same skill where we know there's waste, we know there's inefficiency, we have tons of GAO reports, tons of IG, and tons of oversight at the Homeland Security Committee in the Senate that shows where the duplication is. And all we're asking is, let's pay for it. Let's pay for it. This place is so manipulated, I couldn't get a score until yesterday because somebody was telling them don't give him a score. And then when we changed the amendment, all of a sudden, because we want to know what the amendment, CBO says, well, wait a minute, that might not work. Well, the fact is that CBO didn't read our amendment right. And they know they didn't. And so OMB was consulted. They said this amendment is implementable, and it fits with what the President was recommending in terms of consolidation of programs. So what it really does is, let's make this a start today. Let's actually start paying for things in the years in which we're going to spend the money, and let's not kick the can down the road. Let's not charge it to our kids, because here's the history. When we take 10 years to pay for something, we come back next year and we'll change it. We'll change it. And so what was paid for this year all of a sudden is not paid for anymore. And you know, what it is smoke and mirrors to the American people. So this is very straightforward. It's a clean pay for. It uses 2 mechanisms to get there that has been scored that will accomplish it. And I would ask my colleagues, I fully support the AGOA. I'm sorry we got delayed. I'm actually sorry that it took because there's already been some damage done had we passed it when it came here. That was never my intent. But we can write that today. And what I agreed to is if I lose the amendment, fine. But to not try to pay for things, to not create a discipline, to get back where we should be, we're going to do this. Now, we may not do this today, but I promise you the international financial community in the very short period of time is going to be making us do this. So let's start doing it on our own, under our own terms, rather than what some foreign bondholder or Chinese want to do. The other thing the objections that might be there is, well, if you do this, it'll have to go back to the House. Well, that's right. If this passed on suspension, very little opposition to it, and it'll go back modified. They'll pass it. I've talked to the Speaker. They'll pass it. They haven't passed the other one first because they're waiting on us to act. We'll hold ours at the desk because it has a revenue problem. They'll modify theirs. They'll do exactly what we do. I would just appreciate us to stand up to the real problems in front of us. It's a great goal to want to help these areas. It's a great goal to put the sanctions back on Myanmar so that they can be adjusted and used to create freedom. Those are great goals. But there's a greater goal, because none of those are going to matter if our financial system, our way of life crashes around it because we're not responsible here. I'd reserve the balance of my time.
Does the senator wish to call up his amendment? Clerk will report.
The senator from Oklahoma, Mr. Coburn, proposes an amendment number 2771.
I ask that the amendment be considered as read.
Without objection. Who yields time?
Mr. President.
Senator from Delaware is recognized.
Mr. President, I rise today to speak both in favor of the passage of the bill, Senate Bill 3326, and to speak against the Coburn Amendment. I first want to thank leaders Reid and McConnell, Senator McConnell, as well as Senators Baucus and Hatch for working together diligently to find a path forward for passing this bill. And I want to recognize Senator Coburn and Senator Menendez for being willing to work with us to get to today. And I say with some regret that I stand to speak against the Coburn Amendment because I respect and recognize Senator Coburn's determination to hold this body accountable, to find pathways forward to deal with our record deficit and debt. And in that broader objective, I look forward to working with him on finding responsible pay-fors in future bills and in finding ways that we can steadily partner to reduce the deficit and to find and root out waste and abuse in federal spending. But I have to say that in this particular case on this amendment on this day, if we change the pay-for, we kill the bill. We have heard clearly from Republican Chairman of the House Ways and Means Committee, Camp, and from his ranking minority, Congressman Levin, that they will not take up this bill. If amended in this form, if broken and reassembled, if sent over in any other way. The pressure of today and the pressure of the value, the importance of this bill is what I choose to speak to. I may at some point reserve time to speak to other issues embedded in the amendment, but I first wanted to speak to the underlying bill. I am the chairman of the African Affairs Subcommittee of the Senate Foreign Relations Committee, and it is in some ways my special honor and challenge to help this body grasp why the African Growth and Opportunity Act is important for us to reauthorize today. Specifically, what I'm speaking to is the third-party fabric provision, which expires in September. This chamber is about to go out of session later today, and every day that we delay in the reauthorization of this critical provision costs jobs, costs opportunity, and costs future. Let me speak to that for a few minutes, if I might, Mr. President. Creating American jobs and fueling our economic recovery is my top priority, and I know it is for many members of this body. And that's why I'm here to talk about one of the things we can do to strengthen our economic security. And it may surprise you, but the truth is one of the best ways to look for that future opportunity is one that was considered among the least likely just a few years ago in sub-Saharan Africa. Access to emerging markets is critical to America's health and growth. And increased political stability, rising wages, and an emerging middle class across Africa makes it the most promising continent for countries willing to invest in long-term partnership with the United States. In AGOA, the African Growth and Opportunity Act, and its third country fabric provision, the U.S. has seized this opportunity to pursue broad and mutually beneficial economic relationships that give American consumers and businesses economic security by allowing eligible countries to export apparel from Africa that's more affordable to the American consumer, and in so doing, create jobs in Africa that otherwise would be elsewhere in the world. Mr. President, this key provision, as I've said, expires in September, and our delay in moving forward with reauthorization that has earned strong bipartisan support is already disrupting production for American apparel companies, along with the supply chain their customers depend on. In my view, we cannot wait to take action. America can't afford to turn its back on African markets, and Congress can't afford to turn its back on extending this provision. Every 3 years since 2000, Congress has unanimously passed the reauthorization of this provision without controversy, and it is, in my view, time to do so again. I respect Senator Coburn's concern that we must change business as usual in this chamber, but the timing of this amendment and the timing of this concern is, to me, not wise. Today, Secretary Clinton is in the middle of a continent-wide tour of African countries. She is engaging with countries where strong, emerging middle classes offer us great opportunity, future economic partnership, and very real political partnership. From Ghana to Ethiopia to Tanzania to a half-dozen other countries, some of the fastest-growing economies in the world are in sub-Saharan Africa. The 7 countries that are the fastest-growing economies in sub-Saharan Africa are home to 350 million potential consumers of our products. And in my view, that's why I'm urging my colleagues to vote against the Coburn Amendment and to allow us to pass this critically important bill today. Failing to do so, in my view, is bad both for Africa and for America.
Reauthorizing this provision supports the poorest African workers, the vast majority of them women. And Senator Isaacson, who is my capable and talented ranking minority on the African Affairs Subcommittee, joined with Congressman Smith and Congresswoman Bass, who are our counterparts in the House, in hosting a meeting 3 months and 6 months ago with roughly 35 ambassadors from all over the continent who pleaded with us to reauthorize this critical provision. The economic benefits of a strong middle class in Africa are obvious. A pool of new consumers hungry for American products, potential partners for us, and countries with flourishing middle classes are more likely to have strong democratic institutions, good governance, and low corruption. They're more likely to be stable and bulwarks against emerging sources of instability in Africa, a region which I think is vital to our future. In short, then, Mr. President, reauthorizing this provision and continuing our strong bipartisan supportive tradition for AGOA is where the United States can continue to differentiate itself from competitors like China, which recently surpassed the U.S. as Africa's #1 trading partner. The U.S. has exports to sub-Saharan Africa that exceeded $21 billion last year, growing at a pace that exceeds our exports to the rest of the world. Africans want to partner with us, they want to work with us, and they seek opportunity. The sort of bipartisanship that in the past has allowed this AGOA third country fabric provision to be reauthorized without controversy is one I think we should embrace again today. So let's end the delays and reauthorize this provision. Mr. President, I yield 3 minutes of my time, if I might, to the senator from Georgia who'd like to speak to the issue of the value of the African Growth and Opportunity Act.
Could I inquire of the chair how much of the proponent's time would that 3 minutes leave?
5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. President. I rise for just a moment to do two things. First of all,
Senator from Georgia is recognized.
thank you, Mr. President. First of all, I spent 33 years selling houses. I've dealt with honest brokers, and I've dealt with brokers that were hard to deal with, and I would never categorize as honest. Senator Coburn from Oklahoma is the most honest broker I've ever dealt with in politics or in selling houses. And I want to acknowledge for just a second that exactly what he said about the process, his support for the AGOA provisions, but his concern about the pay-for, but the fact that he never tried to scuttle this piece of legislation, only tried to get his day in court. And I respect that, and I want him to know that. And if we all acted a little bit more like that, we'd have a lot more debate on the floor and a lot less problems in terms of running our country. As far as AGOA, I just want to say this, that the chairman and ranking member, as Senator Coons and I are, of the Africa Subcommittee, we travel to that continent quite a bit. One of my trips was to the Sudan, to Darfur and to the South Sudan when the Comprehensive Peace Agreement was being negotiated. As this body knows, the South Sudan had their revolution peacefully. South Sudan became the newest country on the face of this earth, and South Sudan will become, if AGOA passes today, one of the parties to this agreement, which is critical to the developing economy of the South Sudan as an independent nation. Further, the other nations that are included are nations that depend on this legislation to raise a middle class in Africa that will become the customers of the United States of America and our businesses. I say often in my speeches about Africa that if it's true that Europe was the continent of the 20th century in the first 50 years, and it's true that Asia was the most important continent in the last 50 years of the 20th century, Africa is the continent of the 21st century. This is an agreement that's important to our relationship with Africa, it's important to our economy, it's important to American textiles, and it's important to jobs in Africa. I commend Senator Coons and his hard work, and I intend to support the AGOA bill and ask all my fellow colleagues to do the same. And I yield back.
Mr. President. Senator from Oklahoma is recognized.
You know, it's intriguing to me. We heard the senator from Delaware absolutely assure us that if we defied this, that the House isn't going to do the right thing. Now, my conversation with Chairman Camp was different than that. I don't know what the timing was between our conversations. But it's never the right time in Washington to fix our problems. And we do a lot of great things. You want to talk about job creation? Job creation has decreased by 1 million jobs a year in this country simply because we continue to add to our debt. And this bill adds to our debt. It's not paid for. It has another trick in there that actually charges more in corporate taxes just to get around pay-go. So the point is, and I won't have any more to say on this bill, so we can go on and get to the other. The point is if we stood up and did the right thing and led this country by actually paying for something at the time, the House would change it. Just for the very reasons that the senator from Delaware said. It is important. And if we had a strong vote that said, yes, it's important, but by dingy, we're not going to keep doing the same thing that's bankrupted this country. But now we use an excuse to say, well, here's our reason why we can't do what's right. America should spit us out of their mouth. We never find the right time to actually have the fiscal discipline that will solve our country's problems and create a viable future for our children, let alone African children. So that's a real choice today. I don't expect to win this because this place isn't going to change until the people who are here decide that the future of our country is more important than anything else, and we start acting like it. And we can do good things internationally, but we can do them the right way that will not put at risk our children. Our debt level is such that our GDP is decreased by 1% right now. It's proven. Just because of the amount of debt we have. And so we're going to pass a bill with great intention, which I agree with. We'll have a great result. I agree with that. We can do both. We can actually do better. But it's because there's not the spine in the Senate to stand up and make the hard choice. This country is full of people outside of Washington that are used to making hard choices. And they're doing it in this tough economic time all the time. They're making hard choices. We lack the intestinal fortitude to do that. We should have them here and us home because they know how to get it done. And so what we're going to do is we're going to do the same thing that we've always done. We're not going to make the hard choice. We're not going to do the best thing we can do. We're going to settle for second best because we've got an excuse not to make the hard thing. And the excuse right now is the House won't move. Well, I'll guarantee you, if it's as important as Senator Coons and Senator Isaacson say it is, and Representative Smith, and we sit here and say our position is paid for within 2 years, I'll bet you by tomorrow it's paid for within 2 years. But we won't ever do that because we lack the courage to do the hard thing, the right thing. And what has that gotten us? It's gotten us deeper in debt, a depressed economy, an anxious American citizenry that has no confidence about the future, which is self-fulfilling in terms of driving the economy down even further. It's time for us to lead. This is a small issue, but if we can't even pay for $200 million over 2 years, we don't deserve to be here. We do not deserve it. Because what we're really doing, we're helping people in Africa, we're helping the freedom in Burma, but what we're really doing is taking just a little bit of freedom away from our kids. That's the real vote here. It's really not about money. It's about destroying the future prospects of this country because we refuse to make a hard choice. There could be a lot of flowery speeches about it. We can say we're going to do something good. I would tell you that our well-intentioned desires by the members of this body is what has us $16 trillion in debt. I won't spend any more time. I have the greatest respect for the senator from Delaware. I know he believes in this call. He's bigger than this. He can make this tough vote. He knows how big the problems are. And if we're not going to do it now, when are we going to do it? If we're not going to do it on something small, when are we going to do it? We're not going to do it. And that's what the American people get. That's why there's an uprising in this country to get back to the basics of the Constitution. That's why there's people that are interested because we have mismanaged it, because we won't do the hard thing. Mr. Chairman, Mr. President, I yield back my time. I will ask for the ayes and nays at the appropriate time.
Mr. President.
Senator from Delaware is recognized.
Mr. President, I want to thank my colleague from Oklahoma for his remarks, and if I might just conclude my comments on this amendment by speaking in a little detail to the amendment and its substance. The senator from Oklahoma essentially directs the administration to find $192 million in reductions in spending in the following agencies: the Department of Commerce, the Small Business Administration, the Export-Import Bank, the Overseas Private Investment Corporation, and the Trade and Development Agency. And in my role as the chair of the African Affairs Subcommittee, we recently held a hearing on expanding U.S. trade opportunities in Africa for exactly the reasons that I elucidated previously, that there is enormous growth, there are great opportunities across the continent. Our competitors from all over the world, not just China, but Brazil and Russia and other European countries, are expanding their investment and their seizure of these opportunities in a way that we are not. The structure of this amendment would simply declare that there's $200 million of waste and duplication at several important trade agencies and direct the administration to slash their budgets for that amount and then hope for the best. That is what Senator Coburn's proposed offset would do. These are agencies that promote and finance U.S. exports and help small and large U.S. businesses export and compete in a global market. And in my view, exports, particularly to this market, mean jobs. So I am not convinced that now is the time to blindly slash our ability to export. I think we should instead be encouraging exports. And in the context of the federal budget, $192 million is a very, very small amount of money. I look forward to working with Senator Coburn to find other places where we can find reductions of this size. But this amendment, at this time, on this day, would kill the broader and more important objective of reauthorizing the African Growth and Opportunity Act third-party fabric provision, of moving forward with relevant Burma sanctions, and of moving forward with an important technical fix to CAFTA. This is a carefully crafted compromise bill that the House will enact once we enact it. I urge my colleagues to vote against the Coburn Amendment and to move forward with passage of this vital bill. Thank you, Mr. President. I yield the floor.
Mr. President.
Mr. President.
Senator from Delaware is recognized.
I yield back the remainder of my time. And
Under the previous order, the time until 11 a.m. will be equally divided and controlled between the two leaders or their designees. Senator from Maine is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. President. Mr. President, later this morning, we will vote on whether or not to invoke cloture on a major cybersecurity bill. In the past 3 days, we have received letters from General Keith Alexander, who is the head of Cyber Command, as well as the chief of the National Security Agency, from the Secretary of Homeland Security, and from the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, urging us to act immediately on this important legislation. Let me just read briefly from all three of these letters. General Alexander said the following: I'm writing to express my strong support for passage of a comprehensive bipartisan cybersecurity bill by the Senate this week. The cyber threat facing the nation is real and demands immediate action. The time to act is now. We simply cannot afford further delay. That's what General Alexander has told us. Secretary Napolitano wrote to us, I'm writing to express my strong support for S-3414, the Cybersecurity Act of 2012. I can think of no more pressing legislative need in our current threat environment. The chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff General Dempsey wrote the following: I am writing to add my voice to General Alexander's and urge immediate passage of comprehensive cybersecurity legislation. We must act now. Mr. President, how many more implorings do we need from our nation's top homeland and military officials to act on what many believe to be the greatest threat that is facing our nation? A cyber attack with catastrophic consequences is a threat to our national security, our economic prosperity, and indeed to our very way of life. Our adversaries have the means to launch a cyber attack that would be devastating to our country. All the experts tell us it is not a matter of if a cyber attack is going to be launched, it's when it is going to occur. So I find it incredible and indeed irresponsible that this body is unable to reach an agreement to allow us to move forward on this important legislation. It is astonishing to me that irrelevant, non-germane amendments have been filed to this important bill on both sides of the aisle. It is unacceptable that we have worked hard and have come up with a list of relevant and germane amendments, and yet we cannot seem to reach an agreement to proceed. American officials, our government officials, have already documented that our businesses are losing billions of dollars annually and millions of jobs due to cyber attacks, attacks that are happening on our government and business computers and individual computers each and every day. And yet, our defenses are not there. General Alexander, who knows more about the cyber threat than any individual in this country, was asked to rank our preparedness for a large-scale cyber attack on a scale of 1 to 10. Do you know what he said, Mr. President? He deemed us to be at a 3. Is a 3 adequate to protect this country from a threat that we know is coming, that it's only a matter of time? Now, there have been all sorts of suggestions for improving this bill, and we have adopted many of those suggestions. Indeed, we have made major changes to make this bill more acceptable to those on my side of the aisle. And what has been our reward? To be criticized for making changes in the bill, for having members on our side of the aisle, my side of the aisle, say, well, now it's a different bill. Well, it's a different bill because we took their suggestions, and we took the suggestions of a bipartisan group acting in good faith, headed by Senator Kyle and Senator Whitehouse. Mr. President, there's much more that I want to say on this issue, but I see that the chairman has arrived on the floor, and I know that opponents to the bill, such as Senator Hutchinson, wishes to speak and should certainly be given the right to do so. But let me just say that rarely have I been so disappointed in the Senate's failure to come to grips with a threat to our country that, as all these officials have warned us over and over again, is urgent and must be addressed now. Not maybe in September, not possibly by the end of the year, not in the next Congress, but now. Thank you, Mr. President.
Senator from Texas is recognized.
Mr. President, I just wanted to get the time for our side.